All right, ladies and gentlemen, before we get started with the episode, we've got a voicemail from our old friend Jason. He's going to give us his score prediction for the Northwestern game and give us his thoughts on what he saw in the game against Elon. And we're going to listen to that now.
Hello, guys. It's just me calling in again this week for my score prediction. And I had a chance yesterday to listen to my message from last week, and man, did I sound sick. I was a sick fella. So anyway, a lot better. Went to the game this past week against Elon. Again, not terribly satisfied with the running game, but I think it'll come around, guys. It's just going to take some time for the O-line to come around. But I think it'll get there. I think it'll become an attractive game. Might not be dominant, but I think it can become attractive. One thing I did like was the play calling. It's about time that we got somebody in there that is going to make the game exciting. A lot of misdirections, a lot of routes going in different directions. What I noticed, the big thing I noticed is that receivers, because I really watch the receivers a lot, they're actually finding the spaces in the zones. We actually, not knocking the other quarterbacks that we've had in the past. Riley Leonard really held his own. Not knocking the other quarterbacks, but we finally have a quarterback that can see over the offensive line very well. He's looking into those gaps if he's noticing zone coverages and stuff like that. So I really noticed how the receivers are finding those soft spots in the zones, whether they're adjusting their routes or just finding it and sitting it. I think the timing will get there for the longer passes. But and another thing, I know this is a long message, but I'm really super stoked about our offensive coordinator this year. But we actually got under the center, and I hadn't seen that in years at Duke. Probably even could go back to the Goldsmith days of probably that I can recall. And then we got under the center a lot with Robert Baldwin, but that was really nice to see. Is one of our quarterbacks getting underneath the center. I think that's a lost art, and hopefully we're going to see maybe 5% of that this year of the play calling. So that's really nice. But I think but anyway, I've ranted on enough. I'm excited about all this, but my prediction is going to be a low-scoring game, but I do think we're going to pull it out. I think we're going to be 24-7. Hey, it's me again, being long rant there. First go round cut me off. Wasn't sure if I got my score in there, but score prediction will be a low one, 24-17, 24-17 Duke. I think we're going to get some touchdowns there and get one field goal by our man Todd Polino. But anyway, thanks for all your hard work. I hope your dad's doing well. Want to get that in there from his knee surgery, I believe, or is going to have it, or has had it. But just thinking of him, and just keep up the hard work. And as always, go Duke.
Jason, thank you so much for calling in. I really appreciate it. You do sound a lot better. And look, even after 2 weeks with maybe not a great offensive production, I do agree on the play calling as a whole. It's been good. It's just we're struggling to run the ball. So maybe they go under center. I might talk about this in this episode. Go under center a little bit more, buy Malik Murphy a little bit more time, take some of the pressure off of him. We'll see. But regardless, the running game has to improve. And hey, look, man, your view on these scores are pretty darn close. And I really hope that you're taking advantage of the legalized gambling there in North Carolina, because, dude, you could crush it. I mean, you could turn that into an effective side hustle. But anyway, last thing that I did want to say in response to your comment was thank you so much for the kind thoughts about Dad. He did have knee surgery. It turned out to be a total, not a partial. So a little more extensive than they thought, but he's at home recovering now. He's doing very, very well. And I do know that he appreciates that you are thinking of him, and he is always glad to hear your voice, as am I, on the podcast. Now, as we go into this episode, it's going to be a little bit different, but trust, as the kids say, trust the process. I think you'll like it. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Bull City Coordinators Duke Football Coverage Podcast. You know where to find us, bullcitycoordinators.com. We are on all the socials at Duke FB Coverage, and you can listen to us anywhere you get your podcast, but please check us out on YouTube, as that is where we are. That's really what we're promoting the most. I don't know why we're saying we. I just don't like to say I, even though this is my thing. But anyway, it's a me thing. I'll get over it. So, as you listen to this episode, to get you ready for the UConn game, our friend Graham Chamberlain, you can find him at PawsArfBlog on Twitter, PawsArfBlog. He does some work for Stores Central, which is a UConn athletics news and content site. Check him out there. He's come back on. He was on last year, okay, for the episode to preview for the UConn game, and he's coming back on this year. But we're doing it a little bit differently, and actually he hosted this episode. So you're going to hear his introduction instead of my usual introduction as we get started, and then we segue right to the guest. It just makes things a little bit easier for both of us. There's no reason to do two episodes. It just makes more sense this way. So he was kind enough to send me the audio of what we had done was a video podcast for his episode. You'll hear us talk about what we think about each of our respective programs. He's going to give a breakdown on UConn. I'll give a breakdown on Duke, and we'll talk a little football and then give our score predictions. So we're going to turn now to the interview with Graham Chamberlain from Stores Central.
All right, and thank you all for joining us today here on the UConn Football Pod as part of Stores Central. I am joined again by Ben Bird of the Bull City Coordinators. You may recall Ben spoke to us earlier this summer to kind of give us a macro view of the Blue Devils coming into this season, but now we're going to talk strictly UConn Duke this Saturday in Durham. Is it still Wallace Wade?
Yeah.
Is it still called that?
Yeah, it's Brooks Field at Wallace Wade.
Brooks Field at Wallace Wade Stadium this Saturday night at 6 o'clock on ACC Network Plus. Ben, thanks for joining us. How's it going?
It's great, man. I'm doing great. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm going to be down there. And I think I had the time wrong in a text that I sent to my brother, so I got to fix that now and let him know the correct time.
Yeah, it's a little weird timing. 6 o'clock is not a normal. It's usually 12, 3:37, something like that. Well, we can start by talking about, for your listeners, first couple games for UConn. There have been two very polar opposite games. For the Huskies, they opened up with a 50-7 loss to Maryland on the road week one, which went very poorly. They followed that up last weekend with the 63-17 win over FCS Merrimack. So, what do we know about UConn? I don't feel like we know a ton because we know that they're much better than a bad FCS team. But they're not anywhere near, honestly, and after watching them Saturday against Michigan State, probably a middle of the pack at best Big Ten team. So where does UConn fall? That's a good question. What remains to be seen is who's going to be a quarterback on Saturday. Coming into the season, Nick Evers, the former Oklahoma and Wisconsin quarterback, won the starting job. He went down with an injury against Maryland. His backup, Joe Fagnano, who actually won the job last season, but then got hurt in game 2. So every year in the Jim Mora era, the quarterback has gotten hurt early on in the season. So I feel like at this point, maybe we need to start just putting some random person at quarterback and wait till he gets hurt, right? But Fagnano, he played pretty well against Maryland. I mean, it was against, different personnel than what Evers faced, right? At that point, I think it was still 30-0 when Evers went down, and I think Vignano got them the first touchdown. So it's not like they were going to come back in that one. He follows that up last weekend. 13 for 19, over 300 yards, tied Dan Orlovsky's single game record for touchdowns in a game with 5. He was out of the game before the fourth quarter started. And something that UConn fans haven't seen. I mean, as far as I know, the last time they really beat up on a team like that was like they played Texas Southern in 2010. They won 62-3. I mean, that's the last time they really beat up on an FCS opponent. They have struggled with them recently, although under Jim Mora, they've won by 25 and 28 points against their 2 FCS teams. So he's at least got them to a pretty decent spot. Under Edsel the second time, 3-point win over Wagner. They ended up losing to Holy Cross, which ended up ending his career, honestly. That was it there. So it was a nice change of pace for the Huskies. So for the people out there that say, oh, well, they just beat Merrimack, who cares? Like, it's a good sign of progress for this team. But I think a better sign of progress is going to be what happens on Saturday night. And a lot hinges on who's going to be at quarterback for the Huskies.
Well, here is kind of where I think Duke is. All right. So offensively, well, let me just put it this way. Defensively, this team is going to keep the Blue Devils in games, right? That's the units that is going to keep Duke in games and give them a chance to win. Okay. We saw that against Northwestern with the offense struggling to click. There were moments where you got the ball to Pankel, you got it to Jordan Moore. Hagens was getting the ball. There's a lot of receiving threats. Okay. There were struggles, though, with the run game. I think that this is a team because Murphy's huge. I don't know what his measurements are, but the dude is huge. I mean, he's gigantic.
I mean, I think like 6'4". I thought I saw close to 250, maybe 240.
Right. And so you're thinking Cam Newton, right? But Murphy does not run. Murphy is not a runner. So this is one of the problems with the modern era of football. And when you have everybody in the shotgun, and college sports are generally built around RPOs to some extent, you are not going to really be able to do anything other than encourage the defense to get real aggressive towards coming after the run game, right? You saw Henry Beelan come in for a series. He shook things up as far as being able to run, move Duke down the field. And I'm not saying that we need to see Beelan come in, but what I am saying is this offensive line is retooled, it's reworked. It's going to take 4 or 5 games to really see what it's capable of and what it can do. And part of me is just thinking in my head, maybe if you put this guy under center, had him do 3, 5, 7-step drops, kind of like in the old days, you would see the defense have to pause a little bit more, have to be a little bit more careful, not being able to cheat on anything, right? I'm not trying to say anything bad about Northwestern, but the Wildcats just benched the quarterback, made a change.
Yeah.
And I don't think that was Mike Wright's fault. I mean, he wasn't the one who called that stupid third down play on their last drive. I mean,
right.
I mean, when I watched that the next day, I watched it the next morning, I said to myself, as I was watching it, and just for fun, I was doing my normal live game thread. I just said, Northwestern forgets how to call plays here. I mean, I don't know what that was. And then you're going to hang the loss on him. Braun took, I think, if I remember correctly, some timeouts that he should not have taken in the second half. Anyway, I don't know. But my point about the Blue Devils is the defense did enough to keep him in the game. The offense did enough to click late and get over the edge. There was that kind of fumble reversal thing. I was watching it on a replay, so I just skipped to what the call was and didn't do a deep dive on it. But what I'm saying is the offense has got to step it up. I mean, what we've seen the last 2 weeks has not been good. And I wrote a piece over at the College Huddle, which I'm a part of now, highlighting the problems in the run game. And that's a real issue for the Blue Devils. You have got to get more production out of that unit. And Jaquez Moore is not going to play on Saturday, from what I understand. So it's going to be start Thomas. Yeah. Well, let me kind of caution a little bit. Let me preface what I'm saying is it is a big loss, but it's not like the Blue Devils are running the ball very well. So
right.
I'm not sure really a whole lot of. I'm not sure how much of a loss it is just because the running game has been so ineffective, but that's not Jaquez Moore's fault. I think we have a total of 152 yards running this year. I mean, we haven't hit 100 yards in a game yet. 15, I think it was 59 yards against Elon. That's not going to happen. So I think it's going to be. Would not surprise me if it's a slow-moving game on Saturday.
I would agree, and for some of the fans here that aren't up on Duke football, all right, so they opened the season against Elon. It was a 26-3 win at home. I watched part of it. It was, like you just said, it was a little bit of a slow mover. Definitely weren't moving the ball on the ground, but I did think that I saw some passes from Murphy that like he just missed. So I was kind of like, okay, well, that can get ironed out throughout the season, right? Like, that new quarterback, new room, he's getting used to everybody. And then last Friday night, they played at Northwestern and won 26-20 in double overtime. It was 13-13 at the end of regulation. So, like, to your point, yes, the offense probably is not where it was last season at this point during the game, unless you would disagree.
Yeah, well, last season, Duke won games. So, all right, until the injuries happen,
yeah,
I'm going to have to kind of combobulate myself here.
Pre and post, yes, pre-injury
right,
Duke.
Right. But even then, the offense didn't look great because the deep ball was off. Here, like last week, I thought Murphy was more accurate. The receivers just had some drops. There were a couple of times where it hit the guys on both hands, which is you got to catch it. If it hits both your hands, you've got to catch it. But the problem that we're seeing right now is, last year Leonard, when there was some offensive struggles, could just run, and he would be Riley Leonard. The way the offense is currently designed, we don't have a player who can do that. So there's not that way to elevate it. I still think this is just a little bit more of settling in. But if we're still having this problem by week 6 with not being able to run the ball, at that point, I don't think it's really fixable.
Yeah, I think you definitely know by that point, week 6 should be enough time for everybody to gel and that O-line to mesh and start to figure each other out. I do wonder. I mean, it seems like Jordan Moore is the go-to guy, right? I mean, he had 11 catches last week, 15 targets. Like, seems to be Murphy's favorite receiver right now. Is there another go-to person? Let me change that to, let's say it's 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3, something like that. Who do they go to? Like, because if they're not moving the ball on the ground, that kind of complicates things.
Well, you've got Samir Hagans, who's really fast, and he is finally living up to kind of the hype that we wanted, which I'm not knocking Hagans. I think prior staffs just could not find a way to utilize him well.
Yeah.
I think Jonathan Brewer's system is utilizing him in the way that his skills are best suited. So I'm excited about that. Hagans is one. Hasley, their tight end, is out for the season, and that's problematic not just for the passing game. It's also problematic for the punt game because he was the protector for Duke's punter. And we saw the punt get blocked against Northwestern. So that's a loss there. But you've got Nicky Dalmolin, who I think this is year 5 for him. It might be year 6. I can't remember, but he decided to come back. He can step in at tight end. He's had some catches this year. But also you got Eli Pankel, who had 2 touchdowns, I think, last week against Northwestern, including the game winner. Pankel is back, and he was a guy that Duke could not replace last year. I'm trying to bring up his stats right now. Duke could not replace his production last year. And so to get him back and for him to be the kind of player that he's been and to be as capable as he's been and to just kind of step right in, I mean, this could be a he could become a really, really big player. He's already got 9 catches so far and 3 touchdowns. And the guy can play. He's good. So those are the wide receivers. The problem is, can the O-line hold up long enough to get the yardage when the running game is not clicking? That's going to be a challenge as we start to play our conference schedule.
Yeah, and I think UConn's in a similar bind, a little bit of the O-line. Still, also a newish O-line. Right? They have the 2 tackles returning. They're both either 5th or 6th year guys. They're no problems to tackle. The whole interior O-line replaced. They actually moved the ball pretty decently on the ground against Maryland. The stats may not show it because they just kept throwing, which, I mean, I'm not a coach, but I would say just keep running your offense, even if it's 30-0. Like, you're not coming back and getting 4 quick touchdowns there when you haven't scored all game, right? They have a running back by committee. One of them may be out Saturday. Unsure. He had a broken finger, just kind of wrapped it up and played Saturday, but didn't really, only played a few snaps. So they got 3 other strong running backs. You got Darrell Robinson, the Charlotte transfer. He went for 10 carries, 94 yards Saturday. Mel Brown, I think, at 87 yards. And then you have Cam Edwards, who was UConn's running back 1 last year. He was actually more of a threat in the passing game Saturday. So you have these guys who can run, but they haven't been running as often as UConn teams in the past, which is kind of like a careful what you wish for scenario, right? Because a lot of fans are like, we can't throw. We haven't had a quarterback in, probably really since Dan Orlovsky, like a really good one. So going on 20 years now. Running the ball has been the bread and butter for Huskies throughout its existence as an FBS program. And now the new offensive coordinator, they're starting to move the ball more in the air, which is still new for a lot of us Husky fans, right? It's like, oh, the ball's going forwards. It's not just a screen or, another tunnel screen. Great, man. Like, actually moving the ball. They have Skylar Bell, who's a Wisconsin transfer. He has done quite well this year, back-to-back 100-plus receiving yard games, which I have to look up. I don't know when the last time that happened. It has definitely not been in the past, 9 years. It's been a long time. You have Purdue transfer TJ Sheffield, and then you have just a bunch of other guys that have just been getting a lot of different reps, right? So I think the difference is keeping the quarterback up, keeping him upright. It was a challenge against Maryland. The O-line really struggled. In the passing game, running game was okay, but there's a lot of pressure. And part of that could be, it's just game 1. These guys are still getting used to each other, all that. Was not an issue this past Saturday, which I would certainly hope not, playing against Merrimack. That's where you really hope to see the difference between an FBS team and an FCS team, on your lines. I did want to switch gears a little bit to the defense. So the defense is Duke's strength. I think it's pretty darn good. I think it's probably even a little better than Maryland's defense, which UConn fans may not want to hear because they only scored 7 points. So, I'm looking at some of the PFF grades from this past weekend. Terry Moore is back at safety. It looks like he had a tremendous game. Aaron Hall at tackle did pretty well too. So who are some of the guys that UConn fans should be, what names are they going to hear the most on Saturday night?
Well, I think Terry Moore, Jalen Stinson. I think you're also going to hear Chandler Rivers, and by hear him, I'm going to say it's going to be a little misleading. I doubt that you're going to get a lot of completed passes thrown his way. He's that guy. He's a shutdown. He's a shutdown guy. He's really, really good. You'll probably hear a little bit about Vincent Anthony Jr. on the defensive line. You're probably going to hear a little bit more. I'm trying not to get his name wrong. I'm really bad with names, but Kendi Charles, the defensive tackle, he looks like he's really settling in. And then you've got Wesley Williams as well, who is going to play on the D line. And I wanted to say end, but for some reason I feel like that the position names are not end. I think it's something else. I can't remember exactly what the position names are. But I think that those are the guys that you're going to see get out there and get after it. I don't know the linebacker situation as far as what the health of everybody is going to be. If Nick Morris is or is not going to be back, for example, I'm not sure about that. But we saw some guys step up, including Ozzie Nicholas. He played really, really well. I think he transferred in from Princeton. So shocker that he was smart enough to step in and make some plays. But he showed up. And so I think there will be some good linebacker play. Trey Freeman's another guy as a linebacker who's just really, really good. And I think he's going to do a great job for the Blue Devils all season. It's just going to be – the question's going to be – so for years there was a stretch like the Daniel Jones era where the defense would get burned out because the offense couldn't sustain drives, which was not a knock on Daniel Jones. And at the time, he was throwing to some tiny receivers, and we kept running this really, really quick tempo, and it wasn't really helping anybody, and the defense would get burnt out. So I hope we're not going to be in that situation again. I don't think anybody wants to see anything like that happen, but I mean, it could. But that's why, again, what I'm talking about is I think this is going to be a tight game, man. I think tight from the sense that I don't see Duke coming out and putting up 60 like Clemson did against App State over the weekend. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if it's like a 20-6 game or a 23-6 game, something like that.
Yeah, I think that's super fair. And a couple of notes there. Number one, I think you could say whatever you want about Daniel Jones on this podcast, especially after this weekend. A lot of Giants fans in the UConn fan base who will take any Daniel Jones slander that is out there.
Look, the Giants have been malpracticing for a while on development. I mean, was letting Saquon Barkley go the smartest move?
I mean, I'd say no, but I'm here. I'm talking on a podcast. So, who's to say?
Right. Right.
Point two, you mentioned Nick Morris. Actually went to school in Connecticut at Fairfield Prep. His brother is a true freshman on the Huskies team. Hasn't seen time yet, but he's up there. So it'll be a little family affair down there in Duke. I'm sure we'll get some nice brother pictures after the game. To talk UConn's defense, game one, they got burned pretty quickly. First two drives from Maryland, quick touchdowns. Not a whole lot of resistance there. But then they did settle in. The next few drives, they held them to punts. The problem was offense couldn't put up any points. So defense gets a stop, 3 and out. Defense is back on the field. They get another stop, 3 and out. They get thrown back out there. Eventually that wears you down. And, I think that's what eventually happened in that game. That's not to say that they played great. They gave up over 600 yards in that game. So last week, much better against Merrimack. For a good portion of the game, they had held them under 100 yards passing, which was great to see. But again, big talent differential. So I wouldn't be shocked, like you said, to see the winning team in the 20s in this game, for sure. I don't think that UConn's going to come out and put up a ton of points, and it doesn't sound like Duke will either. For UConn, they're hoping to get back 2 big playmakers on defense, and defensive end Price Yates, and in safety Malik Dixon-Williams. They have not played yet this season. Dixon-Williams has a broken hand. He had surgery. He's supposed to be clubbed up and ready to go Saturday. We haven't got official confirmation on that, but that was the hope that Coach Jim Mora said that he would be back, and they hope to have Price Yates back, but that has to get cleared by the team doctors because it's like a concussion protocol thing. So that's not a coaching decision. They were both out Saturday, worked out okay, but again, it didn't work out against Maryland. So something nice that happened Saturday was at linebacker, Indiana transfer / Troy transfer, Jaden McDonald had a big game. He's dealing with a torn labrum, and he's just playing through it. So a lot of injuries on the defensive end, but a lot of guys are just trying to tough it out. We'll see how long that goes. I mean, hopefully he doesn't reach a point where they're like, I can't go anymore. That's it. But again, it's really hard for me to gauge the UConn defense because you got outplayed so badly against Maryland, and then you overmatched Merrimack, which you should do. So I hope that it's somewhere in the middle, and that they come out and can keep Duke in the 20s. According to PFF, UConn is the worst tackling team in the nation. They were, I don't know if they finished last year last, but if not, they were like second to last. It hasn't been good. So tackling's been a big issue. And it got a little bit better this past weekend, but not crazy better. And Jim Moore just keeps saying, like, we need to tackle much better than we are. It's not happening. So I think that's going to be a big, big challenge against Duke Saturday because some of these guys, you mentioned, they have some quick dudes. They got some ACC speed. So, the arm tackles, the shoulder tackles aren't going to work. They really got to wrap up and bring these guys down. To kind of wrap up here, I guess you kind of gave your prediction already. You get 26 to 23 to 6, unless you want to go something different.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. So if you cover football long enough, and I don't really cover football. I'm not going to hold myself out as somebody who's got credentials or anything like that. I do this as a hobby. But I've had the chance to talk to a lot of guys who've played football at various levels, some all the way into the NFL. Okay. And what I will say is this is belief is a dangerous thing. Okay. It's dangerous for the team that should win to be playing against a team like UConn where everybody, and I'm not knocking UConn, but everybody's thinking Duke's going to win this game, right?
Okay. Yeah.
But here's the point that I'm going to make. Okay. If the Blue Devils struggle offensively, right? How long did Western Carolina hang with North Carolina State?
Right. That was a long time.
Right.
And fourth quarter. Yeah.
Exactly. And we saw, Charlotte gave UNC a run for the Tar Heels money, right?
Yep.
We saw also Ohio, I'm repping my Bobcats here with the shirt, okay?
Yeah.
Give Syracuse a fight, okay?
They certainly did.
So this is the point that I'm making. I'm sure Jim Mora is showing film and saying, guys, look, we got to go out there and just hit them in the mouth, shut down this running game, and we can be in this game. And if UConn does that on the first drive, maybe not the first drive, but they do it the second drive, they do it the third drive, you start getting in that kind of slugfest. UConn starts believing in itself. This is why I'm saying it could be a close game, because if you're an unbalanced team, unless you're Patrick Mahomes and the freaking Kansas City Chiefs, you don't really need a running game, okay? Right. Because you've got probably the best quarterback to ever do it, okay? So the only point that I'm making here is, could Duke go out and put up 30? Sure. But given what we've seen 2 weeks in, I think it is more likely that this is going to be a defensive slugfest, and Duke will win, but it would not surprise me to see a tight game. Okay. And so I think somewhere around 20, 23, maybe 26, and UConn gets about 6, maybe could get 10, 12. Absolutely. And part of the reason I say that is the more the defense has to do, the harder it gets to sustain that throughout a season, unless it's what was that year LSU held people to like 3 points a game or something crazy, and they lost like 9-6 or whatever in the national championship game. Or who was it? That Ohio State team with Krenzel as a quarterback, and Krenzel couldn't like throw the ball in a way that didn't look like he was shooting a duck or something. I mean, it was the ugliest thing in the world. Like, I mean, he looked like he had like just hand, shoulder, elbow, all the surgeries for his upper arm, at once.
Yeah, I mean,
But I'm just saying, I like this Duke team. I like what it's doing. But until we see some completeness offensively, you have to expect it to be a tighter game than you'd like.
yeah, and fair again. I think, for UConn to be in a defensive slugfest, I think would be good. It's like, okay, we can go out and play a Power 4 team and not give up 50 points every single time. That's fantastic. We love to see that. That's good progress, right? Ideally, do that again in a few weeks against Wake Forest, and then maybe you start to feel pretty good about the direction that the team's headed, right? Uh, as I mentioned at the start, we don't know who's going to be under center yet, and Jim Mora has said Nick Evers is the quarterback. If he's healthy, he's going to play. But you just had your backup go out and tie your school record for touchdowns in the game. Most yards in about 5 years for a UConn quarterback. I mean, I think that's really hard to ignore. So I don't know what they do to be like, do you put Nick Evers out there if he is ready? Do you give him another week to recover further, and then go with, the hot hand right now and just see what happens? Or, do you stick with one quarterback, say this is our guy? But I think, they came out and said this is our guy before he got hurt. And it's easier to say that when your quarterback's healthy and you don't think he's going anywhere.
And Jim Mora is a smart guy. I mean, I like Mora a lot. And it would not surprise me if he says, look, the pressure is on me. This is year 3. I got to make something happen. I'm just going to go with this guy. And I can use the injuries
the pressure
as an excuse.
is on. Like you meant, it is year 3. And, he overachieved a little bit year 1, got into the bowl game. And then last year went down to 3-9. And I think this year it's really like you have to go to a bowl game. I don't know if they're ready to pull the trigger. That's it. We're done. We're gonna get a new coach after the season. If they don't make a bowl game, I don't know if they're there yet. And next year he might be in a bit of a precarious spot. If he loses his first few games, and maybe kind of what happened with Edsel the second time around. I don't know, but the pressure is definitely on, and I think the athletic department really wants to see, like, okay, we gave you the things we need that you needed. You needed a defensive coordinator, you got one. You needed a new offensive coordinator, you got it. You asked for NIL investment, you got it. At this point, all that's left to do is win football games now, and I think the athletic department will feel a lot better if they're competing against Duke and Wake Forest, and be in positions to win those ball games. Otherwise, you're really cementing yourself as strictly like a group of 5 team, and that they technically are, but as an athletic department, they view themselves as power. So
it's hard though when you're not in a conference.
And it is. It's very difficult, and UConn runs into often in recruiting. It's like, well, it's down to UConn and Syracuse is in the ACC, and you guys aren't. So I'm gonna go there. It's nothing personal. It's not like they wouldn't have chose UConn if things were equal. That's a reality, and that's why fans get frustrated when the Big 12 conversations start up again. But it's like they have to go somewhere.
Don't pay any attention to that until there's an announcement, guys. Just there's no point. Nobody knows. We have an old saying as a trial lawyer that not even God knows what a jury's going to do, and not even God knows what's going to happen with this conference restructuring. Just don't pay attention to it.
Yeah, and we have the football has been Lucy's pulled that football many times, right? I mean, you think back to that kind of second ACC realignment, right? And UConn fans were like, that's it, we're in. All of a sudden, bam, actually, psych, it's Louisville. They're going to join. I think a lot of fans I think we talked about this last year, but I think a lot of fans sort of hope for like an ACC maybe not quite a full Big East merger. I don't know if like the basketball only schools would agree to that. That was kind of the issue the first time around, right? Is you had this Big East conference, and you had half the schools playing football and half the schools playing basketball, and they were just kind of in opposing directions as to where they wanted the conference to go. And I feel like it's hard to avoid that if you merged. But I think for UConn, it's like, okay, well, if we can join an ACC with BC and Syracuse, and hopefully Big 12 doesn't poach Pitt. Now you have Duke and Wake Forest, and you have NC State. I don't know, maybe not NC State. They might not be there. But, you have a decent core of programs that are good at basketball, which is most important to UConn fans, and also, geographically relatively close. And, would that be considered a power conference in football? I think it depends on who sticks around in the ACC, but.
Well, hey, man, if Bill O'Brien can keep knocking teams off left and right at BC, anything's possible, right?
Yeah, and that would actually, it'd be good. It would be very good. I don't know if a BC gets invited to the Big 12. I don't know what happens. I feel like they want New England. It's like, the reports are that Yormark really wants, he says he wants New England, but what he really wants is New York.
Yeah, and I think the main thing is going to be a lot of this stuff will start to make itself clear and take shape once ESPN decides, if it hasn't already, whether to renew and extend the contract with the ACC.
Yeah.
Because if that happens, and my gut tells me that ESPN has said it is going to, or at least it intends to, which is why these schools are suing to get out, right? If that happens, then it becomes a much more attractive expansion candidate than maybe some of the other conferences, because you can imagine the SEC is like, bro, we're good. We're good. We don't need y'all, And that's where the SEC would say, no, it is you. We just don't need you, right?
Right.
The Big Ten, I don't think it's really interested in expanding, because, it didn't even take Oregon and Washington on full shares, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's going to come down to, is the ACC or the Big 12 going to be able to make room for stuff? And could the Pac-12 come back from the dead? Like, I'm going on a side quest here, like this whole, Eastern Roman, New Roman, Byzantine Empire, we call it. This kind of, historically, it was referred to like as this kind of zombie empire.
Yeah.
But, can it pull a Byzantine Renaissance, the Pac-12, and come back to life? Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah. Certainly not but I think for Big 12, it wouldn't shock me if they get, if the ACC as we know it changes, if Clemson, Florida State get out, it wouldn't shock me to see them go after like Pitt, Louisville, and you have a little bit more of an Eastern side, give West Virginia some company, because they're a little, they have Cincinnati now, but same with UCF, gives UCF a little bit of sort of neighbors. But it's all, like you said, who knows? I don't think anybody knows. The ink, I know that, the reports were literally, they're talking. And that was, I think that was accurate. They probably were talking, but it's a really tall task, for your Texas Tech's president and be like, hey, man, you got to start playing UConn in football. They're going to, no, we're not going to do that. That's crazy. So I always felt that was such a huge challenge. And the only way it really would have gone through, I think, is if like those schools were really so indebted to Brett Yormark. It's like, okay, we'll give you this, but we're even now, kind of thing. But yeah, that's it. I guess I didn't give my prediction. I'm gonna go 24-10. I think UConn can put up a touchdown. I don't know when that touchdown happens, so don't hold me to that. It might be at the end, like when they played last year in Connecticut. But I think it's going to be a little low scoring, and it might not be the prettiest of ball games. But I think ultimately Duke does prevail, but I think UConn plays well enough to kind of feel good about itself going into. They have a 6-game homestand after this. So, and it's really where their bowl eligibility hopes come into play. They play Florida Atlantic, they play Buffalo, they play Temple, Wake Forest, Rice, and Georgia State. So, maybe Wake Forest, I don't want to say it's unwinnable, but it's certainly going to be tough. The rest are all doable. So it'll be big. And I think, you don't want to get blown out in Durham and lose any sort of momentum you had going into this big homestand.
I think that's the right take. I mean, I think until Duke shows it can be balanced offensively, you're going to have to assume that the two kind of tight games are going to repeat themselves. So that's my take, and that's what I'm going to go with. And I think you're looking at it the right way. And I'm sure Jim Mora is showing them, guys, here's where we can do some things. Defensively, though, I think that's going to be the difference for the Blue Devils. That's what it's going to come down to. And maybe the offense clicks this week, and then I can feel a lot better come the trip.
UConn does have game. They have an annoying penchant of being some teams get right games in the past. So I hope this is not one of those cases, but that possibility is always there. Ben Bird, Bull City coordinators, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find your work?
Check out our website, bullcitycoordinators.com. We're on all the socials at Duke FB coverage, as well as on a couple of them at Antiquity Pod for our companion and unrelated topic. Side Quest podcast, the Classical Antiquity Side Quest, where we cover topics from ancient Greece and Rome primarily, but we're also branching out a little bit into late antiquity time period. So check it out. Just go to our YouTube channel, Bull City Coordinators, and you will find everything you need there.
All right. And as always, we appreciate you all for subscribing and being members of Story Central. And thank you for watching.
All right. Now, before we leave, we've got to check in with Rich Landia. As I mentioned earlier, Dad is recovering from knee surgery, so he didn't feel up to making a phone call. He did have the energy to send a text. I don't know, man. And gee whiz, is this long. All right, bear with me here. I feel like I'm turning into Morgan Freeman reading stuff. So let me just read you his thoughts on this upcoming game. Hello from Rich Landia, and yes, my knee is sore. There's an old adage about how teams often improve the most from week 1 to week 2. However, it seems meaningless with this UConn team. They routed an overmatched Merrimack team in week 1 and were drubbed by Maryland in week 2, so the numbers don't reveal much. I am more concerned about our injuries. The Huskies are dinged up at QB, which might have an effect. I would also like to see the return of the wheel route from our running backs. Getting them the ball in space is always a good idea. The OT win on the road at Northwestern should be a confidence builder for a team still searching for its identity. And I think defense and special teams, editor's note, or podcast host note, kicking teams, will have an impact for us in this one. I wish I could suit up for this one. However, they'll have to do it without me. Duke goes to 3-0 with a 31-10 win at home. Stay injury-free and heal up, fellas. Thank you, Dad, for the check-in. Glad to know Rich Landia is still confident about this Blue Devils team, and I appreciate you taking the time to do this. Folks, thank you so much for listening. You can check us out at our website, bullcitycoordinators.com. You can find us anywhere you get your podcasts. We are on the socials at Duke FB Coverage. The Bull City Coordinator is going to the game this weekend. I'll be there with my brother. We're going to be watching the game. I'm excited. Can't wait to be there. First live game for me of the Manny Diaz era. It's going to be exciting. We're going to have a blast. Hope to see you all there. I don't know where my tickets are. I'll try to post out the seat numbers so you all can come see us during the game. It's going to be just a little bit after my brother's birthday, so you can come by, wish him happy birthday, and we can say it all together, man, because we're going to need it. with the injuries that we've got, it's a big game. We got to get healthy for Carolina. Well, for Middle Tennessee first, then for Carolina, then Georgia Tech, then that murderer's row stretch. We got to do it. We got to all say it together. As always, go Duke.